Hello, and welcome all to another episode of Myths and Magic. Your Lord, your Savior, Leonard will be with you momentarily. But first, he has urged me to remind all of the viewers to please keep their pens out, their notebooks open, and their clothes fully on. On this channel, you will be discussing the many matters of myths, of magic, and everything that is wrapped up within those two subjects. We urge all of you to please, if you are underage, have a consenting adult next to you to guide you through these processes. There have been many mistakes in the past by people not being prepared for what fully happens through these episodes, but your Lord and Savior, Leonok, will do everything in his power to ensure that all of you have a wonderful experience. So, without further more delay, keep your wands up, your roads on, and your minds open. For your hearts welcome, your Lord, your Master, Leonok!
Oh my god. Hello all of you, hello, welcome to another video, welcome to the recording for your Lord, your Master, your Savior, Leonok. And I am indeed here, and honestly, I have been dreaming a dream. Hello, beautiful. Oh my god. Yeah, I haven't woken up in a while. Oh my god, but it was splendid. No, but honest to God, The Sandman, believe it or not, is not a bad show. It's very dramatic, which is what I like about it. It sort of delves into the whole, I guess, emotions and the subconsciousness of humanity, of, the type of lives and opinions and freedoms they have, their deepest, darkest desires, as well as their dreams. It is absolutely phenomenal in that aspect. People treating it as if it's some sort of run-of-the-mill comic book show, but it's entirely fascinating. Why? Because it's diving into the id of the people, the id of the persons where it talks about, and I thought it was rather fascinating. But I know you probably noticed the first time my voice is perhaps a bit off. I had a slight issue, a hiccup back home. Spell work, obviously, and a creature was nearby. It was a whole fiasco, so I got some of it in my lungs. It wasn't my soirees at night. It's nothing like that. So, but please, like I said, I'm going through things right now at the moment. It's not the first time I've recorded a video like this. It's just, I am superb at my acting skills and my voice work. No, I'm too much. But hello again, my lords, my ladies, my knights, princes, princesses, my warriors of darkness, my beacons of light, the winners, the wizards, the losers, and the lizards, and of course my rats. I'm so happy to welcome all of you to my lovely little domain here, which may perhaps be moving soon. Yes! It's a lot of things, But although I have grown quite adjusted to the whole, drab look, the pseudo noble drab, me living in a dungeon for the longest time. Because, I've been on the run from certain entities as well as people and other spirits of other kinds. But, I just further, so it's been quite some time since I've spoken about, any sort of mythological creature, at least where they come from, everything else. And I was like, you know what? I think the last thing I've even talked about was probably, God, was it mermaids? I honestly don't know. I couldn't even quite tell you exactly. But I do believe, though, I believe it's well worth the wait. That even though I did want to talk about a little bit about my little tirade in the beginning, but perhaps if I have some time to, talk about it, then perhaps I will, with the creature in question. But first, I don't believe I'm even talking about this sort of subject. Now, I don't know if this is the subject of the video, but I will make a little note of this for you right here. Dreams is what we're going to be talking about, at least in a little bit, because honestly, The Sandman has been taking off. People have been watching it. But I do hope that they're sort of peering into the dark meanings behind what is portrayed in these shows and how it actually works. Now, the dream world as one is one that hasn't been widely studied, at least by science to a certain extent. It's something very arbitrary. It is believed that it is something that our mind projects in order for us to sort of navigate our own emotions, our own subconscious, sort of ways for us to help solve these sort of problems. But other people believe it is perhaps a gateway into another realm, another world, in which the mind or perhaps even the soul is able to escape to. And upon returning, effectively change the person that it belonged to. But it is quite fascinating. And so if you're doing a lot of research into things like astral projection, even things like dreaming, what these things are, the waking dream, the non-waking dream, and it can be a bit ambiguous and a bit difficult to understand, but I feel as though I sort of understand what's going on here. But I believe the main crux of the show so far, I'm not sure if they're finished, if they're still ongoing, is the fact that dreams essentially make a man what they are. And I mean man as a gender neutral term, mankind, human, woman, man, non-man, whatever, inhuman, whatever. It's simply a term that's meant to attribute a certain thing to a species or a genus of people or whatever. It's pretty much what I'm using it as, a general statement. The sort of skyscrapers you see, the beautiful landscapes that you see sometimes that are man-made, the sort of, families, the video games, the movies, and everything else, these are all byproducts of dreams, aspirations, desires, the personalities, the different types of, humans that are within the one man. It's quite absolutely extraordinary. And it's something that not so many people tend to talk about, unfortunately. But it has been something that I've thought of every now and then. And so when this sort of show came up, I was like, I have to watch this to see what this is about. At first, I was a bit nervous. I was like, what is this huge action flick, the Sam and everything else. However, making it a king or a sort of lord over dreams, and as to how these dreams affect the dreamers, and how in turn it affects the outside world is quite extraordinary. Things like hope can sort of come from dreams. Things like despair can sort of come from those things as well. And even just, the waking world is so much that our mind seeks an escape. Our spirits, our souls call forth for some kind of succor. They call forth for some kind of, remedy for this situation, for the illnesses that they encounter on a day-to-day basis. But honestly, I mean, if I had a Lord of Dreams like this, how could you want to wake up ever? I mean, of course, you probably would never see him, technically, by law standards, but I believe it's honestly fascinating show. Absolutely fascinating. I recommend everyone to watch it because it is something that perhaps makes you think a little bit in the more spiritual, emotional, esoteric sense, is what I'm pretty much speaking. It is an adult show. There's scenes in there, some quite gruesome, some quite graphic, that I absolutely adore. And then other times, it's like, well, it's very humbling, sort of. It is a show about self-discovery, understanding what makes a person who they are and how it affects their lives and how it affects other people. The fact that this was a DC project could perhaps be revolutionary for their franchise, because we know their movies are shit, unfortunately. But they have a series here that, for the most part, is working out for them. And they are discovering that the sort of long format, sort of building up these sort of things, because there is a reason why people fell in love with the DC comics. There's a reason why they had a foothold to begin with. And sort of through these sort of processes, these sort of long things in discovering the person, the darker parts of humanity, the darker parts of our inner personality, could hopefully bring them out of the gutter and onto the street, honestly. Yes. But there's the whole thing about dreams or tirades on dreams, is that they are essentially constructs that are sort of made involuntarily by ourselves to sort of not only escape, but to find something that we are indeed lacking. From where I come from, there's a different understanding upon dreams. Dreams is essentially the soul's way of speaking to the mind or to the user. The part of you keep locked away. Some people say it's your dormant mana. It's a form of magic, which it absolutely is, because it affects a change in the character. Though the workings you do are completely not done by you. It's involuntary working. It's passive magic. But it is something that works behind the scenes in an effort to sort of communicate with its wielder, its possessor. And dreams are a sort of way into that. And so when you are engaging with the dream, and when you are, training yourself enough to lucid dream and things of that nature, what you are doing is that you're essentially allowing yourself to communicate with your inner being, with the part of you that is perhaps locked away, that is in need of something, in order to find some sort of middle ground or to supply it with what it needs. Every now and then, dreams also call out. It is sort of a way for the things inside you that is perhaps kept dormant or perhaps kept caged to sort of have a sort of escape? How many sort of desires or dreams or fantasies do we have that are seldom ever completed or ever come to fruition in the real world that we can then fully embrace within the dream without consequence, without judgment? And then there's sort of things that makes you wonder, if these things are so bad, why is it that your soul cries out for it, that your spirit sort of cries and it bleeds for it? It's a very deep subject, and the fact that the series is going deep into it is what I'm very appreciative of, and something that is incredibly important. Okay, so as far as the things like dreams, and I can't remember at all if I ever talked about it on my channel before, but it is essentially a way for you to discover yourself. And at times, because dream is a separate realm that is in turn on a ley line with that of the spirit realm, because it operates in a different reality. And it only sort of happens when the body remains asleep and your spirit as well as your mind can sort of remain awake. Your soul and spirit are essentially intertwined with one another, though they have different aspirations or needs. The soul seeks identity and fulfillment. The spirit sort of seeks an existence. It doesn't really need a purpose to simply be. But what keeps it going is its existence, its identifier, which is what spirits on the outside with no corporeal forms sort of crave. That is why the strongest ones, the ones that persist through time, are the things like gods, ones that have maintained their sort of identity, that have maintained their gifts, their powers, their influence. All of these sorts of things through time have sort of shaped and kept the spirit, carnate in its incarnate form. It is absolutely mind-boggling sometimes, but it's something that I believe is something that is very essential to any spirit, we ourselves included, for we ourselves are spirits. But that is essentially the tirade on dreams. Now, honestly, before in the previous video, I spoke about the things like entities, what they are not. And I mentioned things like servitors. I even mentioned things like tulpas. But there are also different sort of things that sort of can, agree to upon a contract to work with the wielder, or are simply extensions of yourself, like a servitor, a type of drone is what I believe I listed, because they operate on the same exact functionality and upon the same principle. The only issue is that whenever you become attached to something that is just simply meant to serve and carry out tasks, it can sort of, cause some problems there, because then you are trying to attach an identity, a personification of what you are interacting with. It's sort of like how a fork is meant to pick up food. You can use it to slice, you can use it to sift through things, but it has its, a purpose is to help you to help you eat or to gather things, but its abilities are things like slicing, are things like, dicing, I suppose, stabbing, sifting through, picking up. These are abilities that the servitor possesses, but the servitor is a tool in the most crude sense. And some people sort of like to sort of use that sort of terminology, because I believe there is a distinction based on my research, that there's a distinction between what servitors are versus things like familial spirits, or spirits that you speak to, things like familiars, or even things like tulpas, or other spirits that you have a conversation with, a contract with, even things like deities. These are sort of independent of you. They are not something that you essentially create. These are things that sort of find you and that agree to have this sort of contract with, an agreement with, provided you are giving them your end of the bargain, and then they feel all the well, compensated enough to give you what you require through that transaction. The issue that lies is because we sort of forget what spirits are, who we are. And so when you sort of develop in this sort of slave-master relationship, the ability of choice is sort of taken out at a certain point. And even though they willingly put into it, but it is a contract, it is an agreement, a compromise that two individuals are having amongst themselves, which is inherently equal to an extent. But servitors, in the traditional sense of what I'm speaking, do not have that luxury. They're not really all the spirits, as it were. They are simply forms of energy. They are essentially spawns of our own energy that are mentally manifest within the world that we can interact with, that can then cause a change to happen, either within the physical realm. It's entirely possible, depending on how powerful the thing is, or how powerful the energy that was required to make it is that fuels whatever the servitor is. But again, this is a sort of deep subject, but it can become very involved very quickly. And so the issue is that if you believe you may have an issue and you don't always even need a servitor, some people don't actually need that. If you are self-sufficient, you're fine. If you simply want a companion from the spirit realm to just be with you, you can be friends. Sometimes friends do things for one another. You are welcome to do those things, absolutely. But if you do not feel comfortable with having a sort of slave master relationship, and I understand that it is perhaps a hotly debated subject, and I don't mean to make it a derogatory statement for people who do practice this sort of thing, but in a crude sense, that's essentially what it is. Or perhaps if you want to be more, I believe, technical, I believe more safe, you could simply say it is simply an architect with his tools, or believe a baker with his tools, the knife and the fork for a cook or a chef. It is sort of like that. An architect of their own will, but an architect requires some tools and perhaps things that help him submit, or complete a certain task, is simply what I'm saying. Okay? No one please take offense. I'm simply trying to explain to these in sort of layman terms in a way we all sort of understand. You may not agree with the labels or things of that nature, but there are truths to what I am saying. A spoon or a fork has no sentience. It has no will. It has no drive, so to speak. They simply exist to assist the person that wields them. Servitors can work on a similar manner, if you create them for that task alone. It's because before, that is why I made the distinction that not all energies are spirits, but all spirits are forms of energy, except the energy has attained a sort of self-awareness, has attained a soul, for lack of a better word, versus something that has not. That is why those things act the way they do, erratic. They have no real, drive or will of their own, but they are able to be manipulated by us and by spirits because we share a connection with them that allows us to guide the current, to guide the energy into a form or into an area that we could then use for whatever it is. Whenever we do things like crafts, us doing the craft is a way of us manipulating and guiding the energy into where we want it, which would be the end result, okay? A gift box is not the magic. It is a result of the magic, okay? Whatever crafted the gift box, whatever the thing was put into the gift box, the working that was done to create the gift box is inherently the magic, the craft. That is what it is, okay? Mana in itself cannot simply do this sort of thing, cannot sort of manifest magic. It is extremely rare for it to happen. And in nature, you can find evidence to support that, okay, with things like weather or anything of that nature. But when you're talking about something specific like a gift box, that just appears, a gift box didn't inherently come from nothing. It was simply a thought, a dream, as it were. And because we ourselves are dream makers, we are lords of a dream as well, we have the power to sort of translate or to create the dream and push it into our reality. And that is inherently what we are doing with magic. Things like boons and blessings, we do everything we can. We are doing works. We are putting something out there for it to come back in our favor. We are pushing boxes and cardboards and papers and wrappings out, designing them in a way to give us a gift box to our liking that we can then give to somebody else, that will then have an effect on that person and cause a working within that person. And when the working within that person is manifested, it is a form of magic. It is the magic having an effect and thereby happening again. It is when you drop something in a pond and the ripples splay out from the original source. Each ripple is different in size and intensity, but it all originates from a source. Dropping the pebble into the pond is the work that was done. And so the action that took place, the reaction that then caused, in effect, a change to occur that then made a result afterwards, is inherently magic. And I understand that there is a scientific explanation for these things, But it's like what I said, perhaps it felt like eons ago in a video. It's a different sort of understanding, a perspective of what you perceive as magic. But we understand what you are saying. It is an observance you made upon whatever you were watching. But we are simply saying that the work itself that is happening is a form of magic. That is perhaps the best way I'm trying to describe it to you. Okay? So, servitors aside, spoon and fork, tulpas aside, think of it as a dog or a cat. And I believe that may be inappropriate to say. Think of it as another person, perhaps, with a different form or different look. They come from somewhere, you enter into a mutual agreement. They can do things for you either to favor as the harness, or perhaps if you do something, as an agreement, they do things, you do things, to compensate, to make them feel better. When you have a job and you go to that job, your employer is making money from you working, and you're making money from you putting in your time to work. It's an agreement that you made when you became, I don't want to say enslaved, but you agreed to work for this employer. They will dictate the tasks you are to do. You have your own abilities, you have your own self, you have your wherewithal about the work itself. What you are doing is to benefit the employer, but by doing so, the employer also gives you something in return. Okay? That is essentially an agreement. All of us at the end of the day are sort of tulpas, okay? The moment we become servitors are when we are people without sort of souls or motivations of any kind. We are simply work just to work. Mindless machines, pretty much, is who we are when we sort of become servitors. But, that's as far as I'm understanding it, and as far as I'm explaining it. There could perhaps someone that could perhaps explain it better, but essentially my understanding of the certain subject, okay? I myself am one that, chooses to work with spirits, and I'm still learning because it's a changing thing. I am not an exact expert in everything magical. We have specialists for that. Just like in real life, you have specialists for certain areas of work. The same thing applies to witches out in the field, or for mages, or for wizards, or whatever you want to call yourself, okay? So there's that function. And dreams, like in the show, are things that help that function, can alter that function, can give us motivation for the work. What we are dreaming for, what we dream for, is inherently the result that must result in order to happen from a working of some kind through magic. So it's things like that, okay? All right. So I believe it's enough of that tirade, for example, as far as dreams are concerned, as far as servitors or tulpas are concerned, as far as spirits are concerned. So I believe now I will perhaps dive into, what the current subject of this video is going to be, okay? And I believe I talked about vampires. I believe I talked about things like werewolves. I talked about things like trolls, by mermaids, by centaurs or minotaurs, all workings of things like magic or whatever. Oh my God. Okay, I know what I want to talk about. Oh my God, this will be fascinating. Although I should, preface this by saying, what I say to the creatures that these represent to out there, it is in no way of me being offensive at all. I'm simply coming at it from an understanding as sort of divulged from doing things like research. If you are perhaps a practitioner that practice with these certain types of creatures or entities, please notify me, let me know. And, if we can even do a talk even like this while we're recording, I would absolutely appreciate it. So I think the next thing I will be talking about in this video are the Fae, or the fairies. Now, this is something very particular because who and what they are can sort of change depending on which region in the world you come from. In certain aspects or circumstances, the Fae to some can be a boon, can be a welcome sight within the home. For others, it can be the exact opposite. But like Fae are essentially also types of creatures or spirits. They have their own sort of inclinations, their own moral compass, their line that they sort of tread that can either align with our own or not. Some Fae are more things like wild in their nature. I don't want to say they're all animalistic in that sense, but they are creatures of their own device. And there's a way of us, having a type of respect for them and understanding in order for us to sort of work with these creatures. Now, there's a whole lot of history about these sort of things, but I'm going to tell you the history of my people, how we understand it. So the world as you know it was a world of multiple realms and universes. At a certain point in time, in the beginning, from what we understand, from what we are researching right now, currently, that, the veil that was there was not there. There was simply doorways that were open. Each world was its own individual form, but had a connection to another world, to it, another realm. Sort of like how families have blood that connects them. The worlds, as you understand them, work in a similar manner. Now, Fae, through, constant contact and things like that, were in many different worlds at a certain time, as were many other spirits or many other different kinds of people. When the worlds were cut off, there were certain Fae that were kept within those worlds and sort of remained denizens of those worlds, or residents of those worlds, as I should better say. And so through time, when a creature of any kind, us included, remain in a certain space, we sort of develop habits, we sort of adapt to where we are. And so when the Fae were sort of kept in these certain different worlds or realms of existence, they in turn adapted or adopted certain customs or even ways of being in order to survive or to simply, just live within these realms. However, that means that there was some in our realm, in your realm as well, when the gates were closed, when the veils were closed, when the portals were, sealed shut. And there are ways for those to open those sort of doorways, but it takes a great amount of energy, things like magic. However, the Fae have to sort of operate in a sort of separate line of existence that works for them, like it does for us here. The thing is that, and this sort of gets really deep into the subject, you understand how I just said how the worlds were connected beforehand, and how there was a shut, there was a sort of closing, a seizure of the portals. Our spirits work in the same way. You see, before, our spirits were simply free and we could see things and interact normally with other spirits. But through time, from us interacting with other worlds, we sort of found things like vessels, which I was going to talk about in a separate video, that we sort of came into contact with. And sometimes, whenever a soul like ourselves went into something, that thing sort of came to life. Things like golems, or how you think, or if you want to be super abstract or religious, you could think of the whole, God breathing into, dust and creating atom, and how he came from whatever. As the most, because everyone sort of knows that it's a general belief or religion that most people have within the US anyway, what I'm speaking to. But, there's also the other idea with that point is that, when we came to this world and when we were shut off from the other ones, at least immediately, through time, in order to affect in a change in our world, we needed physical forms, physical bodies. So when our spirits, when our souls were strong enough to become entities in and of themselves and to sort of gain more power, this was before when we were able to identify each other and see each other as individuals, not as soul-sucking tyrants like gods, for example. I'm sorry. We sort of learned how to sort of manipulate the earth around us, which was teeming with mana, teeming with energy, and shape it into vessels for our souls and spirits to then, inhabit. Okay, that's what sort of first people sort of came into being. That's why we can sort of decide or whatever, or to understand exactly what happened at the beginning, okay? And sort of, the whole history from then on, we give birth to everything else, and we create vessels for other creatures to inhabit things like other souls and spirits, and blah, 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 blah. It's a whole thing. But when it comes to things like the Fae, with creatures like the Fae, they are creatures that operate a bit differently. They are creatures, and some of them, believe it or not, sort of learned this technique themselves, and they became things like animals or beasts, that we have today. Things like dogs or cats. Some of them possess Fae spirits. Some of them could have perhaps been Fae spirits that sort of were able to sort of manipulate or create things in order for them that identifies with their being a bit more. The thing is, in doing so, they sort of, through time, sort of lost the communication that they used to have with us, with other beings, with other spirits. Identifiers, common language. However, you can tell nowadays that a human and an animal can essentially coexist within the same space. We have a general language. It's a simply means of understanding you based on your most base material form, because it is what took over since your spirit was no longer required or necessary for the task it had to delve into in order to exist, which is what a spirit craves for, existence. A death to a spirit is to cease to exist. Okay, it is oblivion, which is what every spirit sort of fears above everything else. So when it comes to things like the Fae are simply creatures of their own kind. You have to sort of understand who they are and what they're trying to do. Some Fae, they take different forms that are depicted in our mythologies, things like fairies, which is most common. Or even things like, ogres of a certain time, things that have been sort of twisted, manipulated, grown darker. They are a type of fae, but they're different in that sort of aspect. Or even things like trolls, if I'm perhaps being a bit mistaken. But the fae are creatures that are to be understood, to be learned. And the fae are capable in their own powers and in their own manner and how they use the abilities that they possess. But it is entirely possible for one like yourself to come into contact with one. But you have to understand how they speak, how they communicate, the frequency. Because if these are fae that are still remaining within the spirit realm and interacting occasionally on physical devices like bodies or anything else, they're going to have a different method of communication. Doing things like magic, things like rituals, things like practicing, enables you to decipher the language that they have in order for you to better establish a mode of communication. So once you have that communication, you can then come into an agreement, a contract of some kind, if you like, or simply have a friend of the fae. And they are willing to work with you if you're willing to work with them and accept them for their faults and who they are as people in and of themselves. Some fae would like to live in your home, do things for you. Sometimes they bring things out. Sometimes some fae simply want to have some fun and do a little bit of mischief, okay? But like spirits, fae themselves are sort of guided by their own motivations and their own machinations. Some seek to, sort of help themselves out as spirits as they can. Some fae want to become gods. Some fae want to become lords or powerful entities with a lamp to effect a change. Like I said, they have their own different sort of motivations behind certain things. Because anything like a fae is essentially anything like a human, anything like a spirit. We're all connected by something. And at one point, so were our realms and so were our worlds. But they were separated, they were cut off and shut. We don't know why. Okay, some could say it is an illusion of the physical body itself, shutting itself off from the rest of the universe, from the rest of existence. But these cosmic energies exist, just like spiritual energies exist. But it operates on a different frequency that carnally our bodies are just not simply able to reach or communicate with, unless if we've been training ourselves in deciphering parts of that hidden language, part of that hidden understanding. Okay, so there's that. But that is a brief introduction into the fae. Okay, that's sort of part one, I think, of when it comes to the things like the fae. Now, I will be doing a lot more research on the subject. Hopefully, I will have to get a hold of someone who perhaps participates more with the fae, that I am then able to bring on here, maybe speak on this subject. But unfortunately, I don't have too many, friends that sort of practice this sort of things in the real world. Unfortunately, I'm a bit alone at the moment, but I am doing my best to sort of undertake this task and bring it to light, okay? But without further more delay, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that what I spoke to you about has a sort of weight to you that sort of, bears fruit within your soul, within your spirit, sort of helps you understand and gain understanding. I hope all of you are doing your best to stay safe, to practice in safety, whether it is sex or magic, that you are treating others with kindness, respect, and understanding, consideration, that you are diffusing situations that could perhaps be hazardous to all or to yourself, and that you are amplifying your connection with wherever you get your source of power from, your mana, okay? Wherever you get your mana from, go into it. Not only just deal with spirits, some deal with things like natural energies, cosmic energies. Some simply deal with the spirits we have here, or the natural landscape, things of that nature. There are many different sort of classifications, iterations of what a witch is, or what a mage is, or whatever you want to call them. The point is that whatever you are doing, and if you're simply up to your own person, up to your own control, try to establish something that means something, is what I'm simply urging all of my students. All the magic in the world can't solve all your problems. At some point, you have to think outside the realms of magic in order to solve your issues, okay? So, without further more delay, I won't bother you anymore. Keep yourself safe, feed yourself, and you better keep locked in the cage. And remember, not only are we family, we are friends, and we are together. I love you dearly. Goodbye.